few weeks ago, the Boston Celtics officially became NBA champions. As a Celtics fan, it's honestly a pretty surreal moment. After years and years of trying to get over the hump, seeing them break through with Tatum, Brown, and Al is nothing short of incredible. While the team as a whole has been consistently ascending for pretty much this entire decade, there was one disaster of a season where it almost all fell apart. After re-establishing themselves as a contender in 2020, the team pretty much entirely fell apart in 2021, as they suffered their only first-round exit in the Tatum and Brown era. Today, we'll be looking back at this dumpster fire that was the 2021 NBA season to figure out what went so wrong and to see just how close they were to falling into mediocrity. Heading into the 2021 offseason, the vibes were cautiously optimistic surrounding the Celtics. After retooling their roster due to the failed Kyrie Irving experiment, they made a run to the conference finals, where they lost a competitive 6-game series against the Heat. While the loss certainly stung, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown proved for the second time in 3 years that they're capable of leading a deep playoff run if they have the right pieces around them. And the craziest part is, they didn't even have that either. They were severely limited in the front court, as Daniel Tice was their starting center. No disrespect to Tice, but that clearly wasn't going to cut it if they were trying to seriously compete. So with a couple smart moves in the upcoming offseason, they could have become a true force out in the East. But they did have one major issue on their hands, and that was Gordon Hayward, as he was an unrestricted free agent. Following his disappointing 2019 return from his gruesome leg injury, Hayward bounced back in a big way during the 2020 season, as he averaged a super efficient 17 points per game as Boston's fourth option. But his year came to a disappointing end as he injured his ankle in the playoffs, leading him to miss a bunch of time and making him ineffective even when he was on the court. It was clear that Boston was better with him on the floor, but the question was whether or not they should commit to him as an integral part of the team due to his injury history. Once free agency opened, it was pretty clear that he wasn't going to be coming back to Boston, as there were a few teams willing to pay him much more than anything the Celtics were ever going to give him. At one point during this whole process, the Pacers reportedly offered Miles Turner and a first-round pick in a sign-and trade to make the financials for Gordon Hayward work. Losing Hayward would certainly sting, but bringing in Turner would have not only rounded out the roster better, but would have also given them another young piece who was on the same timeline as the Jays. In the end, this didn't end up working out though. Nobody knows if it's because Danny Ainge fumbled this deal, or if Hayward simply chose to not sign with Indiana, but the former Celtics star chose to sign a massive $120 million deal with the Hornets, leaving Boston with nothing in return. To make matters worse, the team didn't really have anyone else that they could target in free agency to make up for the loss, so they ended up having to sign over-the-hill veterans like Jeff Teague and Tristan Thompson. Clearly, free agency didn't go the way they wanted it to. As games were about to kick off in late December, it was announced that Kemba Walker would be missing the first month of the season as he was recovering from a knee procedure following the bubble, so this paper-thin roster was already depleted from the jump. Opening up against the Milwaukee Bucks, the Jays both dropped 30 apiece, Jeff Teague provided a huge spark off the bench, and Tatum banked in a game-winning 3 over Giannis. For a brief moment, it looked like this team maybe could still compete. Follow that by a respectable 8-3 start, as well as the fact that Kemba Walker was about to return, and you really started to wonder if yet another Celtics roster was going to be overachieving again. However, that was certainly not the case. Things regressed to the mean in a big way for this team. For one, Boston had some pretty bad luck when it came to the pandemic. Tatum missed the largest stretch of games in his career during January, as he missed out on about 2 weeks after going into health and safety protocols. While it didn't really affect his stats when he returned, he did note that he needed an inhaler for the rest of the season due to the illness. About a week after JT came back and the Celtics were finally at full strength for the first time all season, Marcus Smart then went down with a calf strain that kept him out for over a month. And remember how Kemba Walker missed the beginning of the season? He was also being held out of all back-to-back games as a precaution as well. In an extremely dense schedule that had tons of games on consecutive nights due to the delayed start of the season, this really hurt the team's ability to properly come together and figure things out. On top of all that, Jaylen Brown missed 24 games this season as well, with various injuries that we'll get into later in the video. Pretty much the entire season, the team hovered around 500, and there were a number of reasons for that. There are the injuries and protocols like I mentioned before, the roster definitely took a step back, but the one glaring thing that was most noticeable was the regression of Kemba Walker. While at face value, his numbers weren't much different than the 2020 season where he was an all-star starter, the team needed more from him this year now that Hayward was gone, as well as the fact that guys were in and out of the lineup so much. However, he just could not get his knee right and he was not able to step up when his team needed it. So with Smart missing a bunch of time, and Kemba being a shell of himself, the Celtics really leaned on the duo of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum more than ever, and they rose to the occasion. They both made the All-Star team while setting career highs for themselves in terms of scoring. But that's exactly what was so concerning about this team. Both Brown and Tatum proved that they were franchise cornerstones, but this was when the question started to pop up about whether or not they truly fit together on the same team. Since they pretty much played the same position, and neither were truly good playmakers at the time, they didn't seem capable of getting the best out of each other like other young duos we saw in the past. For example, with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, it was pretty evident that those two were a perfect fit alongside each other from early on. So when Golden State as a team stagnated in the 2014 season, there was never a question about whether or not the Dubs should split the two up. But on a Celtics roster where they were completely depleted of big men, as well as a reliable, healthy starting point guard, it honestly made sense why some people thought it would be best to get rid of one of them to properly round out the roster. Regardless, this team was pretty much a dumpster fire the entire season, as they grabbed the 7th seed after going 36-36. Their worst record since 2015. This disappointing campaign was compounded by the fact that it was randomly announced that Jaylen Brown would be missing out on the remainder of the season with a torn ligament in his wrist. This was so confusing because at the time he was sitting out with a sprained ankle, so this really came out of left field. It was honestly a fitting way to officially sink the ship on what little hope this team had. Over the course of the next few weeks, we were reminded that Tatum was a superstar in the making, as he had 50-point performances against the Wizards in the play-in tournament and in Game 4 of their first round matchup against the Nets. Aside from that, there really wasn't much to take away from this brief playoff run, as Boston got bounced in 5 games. To put the cherry on top, Kemba Walker missed games 4 and 5 of their first round series, as his knee issues just simply would not go away. Heading into the offseason, this team was in a really bad spot. Yes, they had the star duo of Tatum and Brown, but they had one of the worst contracts in the NBA on their roster in Kemba Walker, that kept them from being able to make any major moves in the free agent market. Also, the Celtics' treasure chest of draft picks from the 2010s that Danny Ainge never pulled the trigger on using in a trade all failed to pan out for them, as Romeo Langford, Aaron Nesmith, and Carson Edwards all failed to succeed in Boston for one reason or another. The team wasn't good offensively, wasn't good defensively, and it didn't seem like there was much to do in terms of roster shakeup aside from trading one of Jaylen or Jason. As we all know, the team then flipped Kemba Walker to bring back Al Horford, traded for Derek White, en route to finally winning a title this year. But for a brief time during 2021, things really could have gone off the rails. Being a fan during this time, I was just completely disinterested in this team. Even though they weren't good in 2019, they at least kept me intrigued throughout the year, as they left me wondering why the hell they weren't living up to expectations. But with this team, it kind of boiled down to two things. Kemba Walker fell off a cliff, and they had nobody to fill Gordon Hayward's shoes. At no point did I ever feel like they were a truly serious contender. It honestly felt like this was kind of unavoidable after failing to keep Kyrie Irving and Al Horford the year prior, and that 2020 was just a flash in the pan more than anything. And one more thing about this horrible year before I get out of here, their city editions this season were just absolutely disgusting. I get what they were going for, as they were trying to mimic all the banners that were hanging in TD Garden, but they're just so bland. I have a video that I did a while back about how jersey design has regressed in the last few years. Be sure to check that out if you want to hear me go into further detail about this topic. And that's all I have for you guys today. Let me know what you guys remember about the 2021 Celtics in the comments, subscribe for more, and I'll see you guys in the next video.